Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, our charity update, where we're focusing on preparing quality board papers. We've had a lot of strong interest in our session today, so clearly this is a topic that concerns the sector, and I hope that we'll be able to support you as you work on this constant challenge. There's not much to cover today in terms of housekeeping, but please do use the Q&A box to submit your comments and questions, and we're going to make sure that we leave time to cover these towards the end of the session. Note that the session is being recorded so that we can circulate to everyone who attended after the event. By way of instructions, I'm Sarah Hillary. I'm a partner here at BDO. I have a specialist interest in governance and lead our not-for-profit team within BDO's risk advisory practice. I also have Laura Stewart here with me today from Board Intelligence. She sits in the commercial team at Board Intelligence and is an expert in driving more effective communication, meetings and decision-making for a wide variety of organisations. She'll tell you more about Board Intelligence, but effectively they help organisations create effective board packs that have impact, thereby supporting the board in its decision-making, as well as supporting management by helping them write shorter reports. So I think it's really valuable having them here with us today to talk about this topic. In terms of our session today, I'm going to start myself by talking briefly about the importance of a quality board pack, before handing over to Laura to discuss high-impact board packs, best practice and next steps. Alison Rowe is also with me today. She's a senior manager in our team at BDO and works with me on our governance work, and she's going to support by facilitating the Q&A. So why are quality board pack papers so important? And that might sound really obvious, but fundamentally, they're an opportunity to improve board effectiveness and to support board decision-making. And a poor quality board pack does impact in the value that you will get from your board meeting. So what's important is that the pack and the information there needs to be timely, accurate, sufficient and appropriate. It's a visible product of all the internal hard work that's done in the organisation by the executive. And it's also an opportunity to build confidence with trustees by being accurate, by being transparent, and by being insightful. I think as well it provides an opportunity to demonstrate integrity, so it's important that you also highlight and address issues in your board packs. Fundamentally as well, it's a way of demonstrating good governance. If we were under scrutiny, for example, by the Charity Commission, how would we look? How would it come across in looking at the board packs from the point of view of the minutes, the actions, the decision-making and the evidence of effective challenge and debate of the issues? And it might sound a really small point, but one of the things that we often come across in our meetings that hampers and affects trust actually between the executive and non-execs is the executive's action that is taken to complete the actions arising from the minutes. Where that isn't done on a timely basis or doesn't seem thorough, it gives the non-execs a bit of a poor impression and can therefore affect trust. And we do see that quite a bit. And from the exec's point of view, they think it's a small thing, but because that's kind of the window of what the non-execs see, it gives it more importance. I think the other thing that I thought was worth mentioning from a charity point of view is the focus on purpose. So all the charities that we work with have a core purpose. What are they there to do? What is their role? What are they trying to change? And we often see board packs that don't really come back to reference the purpose. So have a think about that as well when you're creating board packs and the quality of them and thinking about that. Reminding the board all the time of how this is going to help you achieve your purpose. So just finishing up there really, I mean, I think done well, board packs do help to build that trust and alignment between the trustees and the executive, and good quality packs definitely help you with the effective decision making. Laura, I'll hand over to you so you can expand on all this and help us get better at this.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here today, delighted that you can all join us to talk about high impact board packs. And Sarah very kindly introduced me and briefly board intelligence, but just to build on that slightly to understand where we are coming from. You can see our purpose and our mission as an organisation on the screen here. And effectively, we believe that when organisations, be them not-for-profits or in the financial services or in the FTSE, when organisations can communicate effectively and have the right information at the right time, it can be transformative for how they operate, not only in the boardroom, but how they operate as an organisation, how they operate in society, how they're having the right conversations about the right stakeholders around the table. So this is really at the heart of what we do. And we now work with kind of over 500 organisations across sectors and about 150 odd in the not-for-profit space, and work with about 20,000 board directors. In case anybody is confused, there's two aspects of what we do. So some of you might know us from a board portal, but where I focus, my area of expertise is really diving deep on this issue of board papers and management information as well, and actually how can you transform it to be as effective as possible. So that's my area of expertise, and that's what we're going to focus on today. And to just unpack how we'll be using our time, there's three things that we're gonna make sure that we cover, as well as questions at the end. So please do write in your questions, always helpful to hear. And I know Alison will be picking those up at the end as well. But first of all, we're gonna start with what are the common challenges here? What are some of the pitfalls that we see? I've had the privilege to read a lot of board packs and review a lot of board papers, and I can really say that there are some common themes across all sectors, all sizes, all different types of organisations. So we'll dig into some of those, and I hope some of those resonate with you, and it's why you joined today. But of course, the majority of today's session, we're looking at what does good look like. And I'm going to talk about 4 pillars that really are the kind of cornerstones of a good board pack, and then actually going to share an example paper with you as well, which I hope will bring some of those concepts to life. And then finally, where can you go from here, and what are the questions that we can address to be more specific about your concerns today. So what are the common pitfalls? Well, I think it's worth saying that obviously within the not-for-profit sector, I know that there's a huge range of size of organisations, and some of you will have very established and enormous kind of co-sec teams that are producing these reports. Others of you, it might fall to the CFO, might fall to the CEO, might fall to the EA of the CEO to collate, draft, drive these board papers. So I think that's the first thing to acknowledge, that everyone's coming from a slightly different place. The other thing to say is I know that a lot of you on the line will be writing those papers. Some of you are trustees, so you'll be on the recipient end of that, and some of you are fulfilling the kind of co-sec function as well. But I think these are kind of some of the common themes that we hear from board directors, and I wanted to pull some of these out for you. And please do, as I said, use the chat function if any of these particularly resonate. The first one is around information being very operational. So we can often see that when authors are writing reports, they're quite focused on the detail and not necessarily linking those reports to the big picture or to the wider strategic goals of the organisation. So Sarah spoke about purpose earlier. You know, it's rare that I read a paper that is linked to purpose. And that, of course, has its place. But what we find is that when the information is operational, and actually when it's backwards looking, so it's all about what has been done, the conversation around the board table is also operational and backwards looking. And actually, where board members, and I hear this from trustees and non-execs all the time, they say, I joined this board to add value. And that's particularly true for charity trustees, right? Because they're usually very passionate about the cause that they're supporting. But I actually don't feel like I can add value because I don't have the opportunity to shape what's going on in the future lens. Okay, so there's a couple of things there. There's board reports being operational, but also being quite backwards looking and not necessarily having the focus of the conversation looking at what's coming around the corner as well, which can be really valuable. The other one linked to that comment actually is the purpose of each paper. And actually, what is this paper here to do? And being really explicit about what is the ask of the board as well, which is something that is often missing. So often trustees and non-execs think, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do with this paper. I'm not really sure where I'm supposed to be focusing. There's such a huge wealth of information here, and I'm not actually sure where I should be directing my time. And interestingly, over the last couple of years, particularly kind of 2020, 2021, for obvious reasons, we saw a real increase in operational information, because at the point of crisis, lots of trustees and board members were rolling up their sleeves and getting a little bit more into the detail of things. And actually, as we move arguably into a different economic crisis, but as we move certainly away from that space, we're finding the levels and the appropriate levels of information and what is board suitable to actually, if I say, struggle to move away from that more operational detail that everyone had to do in crisis space. So that's one of the common challenges that we see as well. It's not board appropriate. A few other things to pull out here. Length I've touched on already. I'm yet to meet an organisation who say, yes, our board papers are not really lengthy or really long. That might be not the case for kind of smaller organisations, but certainly paper length is something that we see a lot. We did some research a few years ago with the former ICSA, now the Chartered Governance Institute, and the average board pack, and this was across all sectors, is about 288 pages. And that we know would take a kind of a speed read is typically about 9 hours to read, but we know actually most board directors and trustees spend 3 hours reading and preparing for their board papers. So we know that as a bit of a generalization, often there might be swathes of information being missed. So actually longer is not better, because the key messages are being buried and being lost. The other couple of things to say is there's a lot of information, but there's not a lot of insight. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. How do you actually draw the so what and the implications out of the information going to the board, and not just kind of give them a narrative on what has happened? And then finally, the rose-tinted glasses, right? I think a lot of board information can be very good news stories only, and it's a really important opportunity to demonstrate what's gone well in your organisation to your trustees and what you're proud of, absolutely. But I think also we know that when board members are only presented with good news, they immediately go hunting for the bad news quite often, and that is when, particularly if an executive member is presenting to the board, that is when, and I've had board directors say to me, I'm going to give them a hard time because I know there's something's not gone well and they've just not told me about it. So that's the immediate thing that I'm going to leap to. So these are some of the challenges that we see: operational, backwards looking, lengthy, lacking in insight, and good news stories only, and not a clear purpose or a clear ask for the board. So why is this important to fix? And Sarah did a great job earlier kind of highlighting some of the key themes, and I wholeheartedly agree with all of those, and you will have obviously your own sense of why this is critical and important. But just, I guess, to build on a few of those things, I think if I work backwards and I go to peace of mind first, and obviously from a regulatory perspective, we know that you know, we often work with organisations when they've been spoken to by the regulator about the quality of their board reports. But I think it's worth us asking the question: does the regulator really care about board reports, or do they care about what they represent? And Sarah touched on this earlier. It's really about demonstrating that you are running your organisation in a very robust way, in a way that demonstrates trust and transparency. It was interesting, a couple of weeks ago, I think there was an article on the CEO of the Charity Commission talking about how essentially, and many of you might have seen this, charities should expect greater scrutiny, because there's going to be a leadership crisis in the charity sector when people in the economic climate are being more cautious potentially with their excessive spend. So she was basically saying, as a the public need to have confidence in us that we are going to come down hard on charities who aren't fulfilling their statutory duties or running their organisations in the right way, which I thought was interesting. So I think we need to kind of think about that. Obviously, that's very important. I think there are a few other things that are real benefits of getting this right, though. Actually, the middle column here is I've touched on. It's actually, are you getting the most of the people around the table? We firmly believe that you can have an excellent board, but if they are not set up to have the conversation in the right way and to ask those most effective questions, if they can't really clearly understand and see the risks and the opportunities that you as an organisation have, are you getting the most out of them? And then are you lulled into a bit of a false sense of security because you know you've got excellent trustees around the table, that you think they would have spotted these risks and opportunities, and actually you're missing the mark somewhere because the conversation isn't being set up to see these blind spots, to see the things that have changed. And then the final thing I wanted to note about is really how you can get more out of your organisation by making some quite simple changes. So Sarah touched on decision making and actually making sure decisions are really robust. Absolutely. Imagine if you could take faster, more robust, smarter decisions with everybody who's already in your organisation. You'd be able to move quickly. You'd be able to pivot, when dealing with some of those big issues that are going on for I know many not-for-profits at the moment, digital transformation, rethinking fundraising models in the light of COVID. And this might be things that you've already grappled with and you've already got a plan on, but actually how can you continually be agile, we like to say quite a lot, by flushing out what's most important really quickly, by flushing out the so what really quickly, and actually giving your authors the tools to sit down and write high quality reports that allows them to demonstrate high quality thinking. I'll never forget my first workshop that I ran on this, and an exec came out of the session, which was basically all about how he writes a board paper. And he said, I thought I was learning how to write board papers, but actually I was learning how to think. And when you can get this right, your directors are your exec members are given this tool to be able to think really logically, really clearly, and get value from the process as well. So those are a few things on some of the challenges and what are the benefits of getting this right. And hopefully that's just given a bit more food for thought and built on things that you already know. So what is it that is a great board pack looks like? Well, there's a few things, and I wanted to do this scene setting just to show you what we're not going to cover today. But for us, a great quality board pack consists of two parts: a well-structured agenda and then high quality board papers as well. Now, the well-structured agenda is obviously how much time you're going to spend on things, what are the critical questions you're going to be asking. That's not something we're going to touch on today because of time, but we are going to look at high quality board papers. And then we think about what a high impact board pack is really designed to do. It's designed to do a few things. And some of these you all know and we've spoken about already this morning. But I think the first one, it fully primes the reader to focus on what matters most. And this is something worth saying as well, that actually board papers are made to be read in advance. They are the pre-read. They are the things that allow the directors to prepare fully so they can focus on what matters most in the meeting. When done well, they can also encourage constructive input and valuable feedback. So we think board papers really need to be a flow of information between the exec and the board. It's not a one-way street. It's not a writing of the board paper, sending it out into the ether and not hearing anything back. And then finally, all of this sits together to drive effective meetings, which we've obviously already touched on today. So what does a high quality paper look like? Now, there are 4 parts to this, and I'm going to go through each of them in detail today. It begins with a focus brief. So when you commission a report, what is it actually that is the paper is going to be looking at and focused on? So write stage 1 before you even put pen to paper. The next one is an executive summary. Now, we know a lot of reports have executive summaries. We have ideas and basically a structure for what makes a great executive summary that addresses a lot of the concerns that we spoke about earlier and challenges. So I'm going to share that formula with you as well. Robust, well-structured information. So actually, how do you lay out your argument in a well-structured way? And then finally, all about writing style. Now, everybody has their own writing style. Every organization has its own way of working. But there are a few things that every author can do to make sure they're writing in a really clear, concise, compelling style as well, that I'm going to share with you too. So what do we mean by a focused brief? Well, essentially, we think that there can be a step missing sometimes when authors go to write a paper. And when this goes wrong, authors don't necessarily know what it is their report should be focused on. So an example that we often use is a head of IT or an IT director asked to write a board report for the next board meeting, for the trustees. And so they go away and they write everything around the digital transformation project, the cybersecurity, team developments, latest software updates. They write an extensive board paper and it goes to the trustees, and actually all they are interested in is latest cybersecurity policy, for example. And then what happens is either that paper gets rejected by the board and has to be redrafted, which is a huge amount of time and energy away from actually that person's main job and strategic priorities, or the report comes to the board, it's enormous and it doesn't quite hit the mark and doesn't tell them exactly what needs to happen. So we suggest, before you start any process, actually thinking about what are the key questions that a report should be focused on. What are the key questions the report itself is going to answer? Now, for us, these are high-level questions. These could be things as simple as, what as CFO is on your mind? What are the key things and key developments that have happened in a certain area, for example? But actually agreeing those questions up front with the executive sponsor, maybe with the company secretary, if that's relevant, maybe with the CEO, maybe with the chair, however it works in your organization, but actually just really understanding the scope of the report, what's going to be included, and critically, what's going to be excluded, so that everybody knows where they are from the beginning. And this can be particularly helpful if lots of people are contributing to a report. So, for example, we know that lots of people might hold the pen, but their name isn't necessarily on the report. By establishing these questions up front, you can ensure everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet as well. It can save a huge amount of time and really focus a paper. So that's the first thing that we would suggest doing. The next thing is actually, what do you do with those questions when you've got them? And I'm going to, as I said, share with you a live example of this, so it'll bring it more to life in a moment. But actually, once you've got those questions, we recommend putting them up front on the first page. So actually being really clear for the reader what's going to be included. And this takes the form of the executive summary. Now, a lot of executive summaries that I read like a bit of an introduction, and typically they can be the first 200-300 words that perhaps tumble from the author's mind, and we actually suggest reformulating this a little bit and abandoning some of the things that we learned at school to put some things up front. Now, for us, a good executive summary consists of a few points. First of all, the context. So just a few sentences on why this paper is going to the board and why now. So we talk about the triggers. I think this is really important as well for any trustees who are multi-boarded, who sit in other organisations, because they're obviously not in the organisation day to day, and sometimes it can be difficult to actually allow them to root themselves in the bigger picture. So we suggest a couple of sentences on why this report is going to the board and why now, even if it's a regular report. So even if it's a statement such as, we agree to update the board every quarter on X, Y, and Z. The other thing that you can include in your context that can be really useful is actually a link to your wider strategic goals. So where does this sit in terms of your wider mission? And the other thing that you can do, which is really nice, and I know we've got a few CEOs on the line, so this might be more appropriate for a CEO's report, but I ran an event on this, and a chairman said, actually, one thing that he really likes to see when he sits in any organization is a link to the organization's values at this point. So a link to their, going back to what Sarah was saying earlier, a link to the purpose of the organization, really getting everyone excited about why they are here. Now, that might be appropriate for every report. It might just be appropriate for the CEO's report, but it's worth thinking about what is the wider context here. The next thing we recommend on your executive summary is putting the questions that we agreed previously up front on the first page. So outlining the scope of what's going to be covered in the report immediately, so everybody knows what's going to be included and critically what's not going to be included. And then the next point is your conclusions to those questions. So actually what we say is, this isn't like a story. We don't need to wait until the end of the report to get to the key messages. You can actually pull those key messages forward and put them up front on the first page and answer those questions in their most simplest, most elevator pitch form on the front page, which of course you can then expand in the body of the report as well. But what that does is it really ensures that the key messages are up front. Everybody is aligned on what the central theme is here, and then they can dig into the details. So often we hear the statement, we can't see the wood through the trees. In fact, we hear it so much it's on the wall of our office. You know, it's such a common phrase, and this is one of the techniques that is really helpful for actually combating that as well. The final thing actually that's not on this slide, but I think is worth pulling out, is a function that we call the input sort, or potentially what is my ask to you. And actually there's an opportunity in your executive summary to state really clearly what it is the question you want the board to answer. Where do you want them to be focused? And if any of you are authors, that's a really nice device, because you can ensure and it's your opportunity, I guess, to shape the conversation, or to certainly shine a light on actually where you would like focus, where you would like input back from the board as well, which can be really powerful and lends itself to opening that two-way dialogue, as I was referencing earlier. So that's a great executive summary. The next point is actually how the body of the report is structured and what the report looks like. Now, the reason we talk about a robust, well-structured report is a few things. So often there is a huge amount of information in a way that does appear quite unstructured to the reader that appears in reports, because it can be very lengthy. And there's a few things that you can do to break this down. First of all, we suggest taking those questions. So you might be able to tell we're quite focused on questions. We really think question and answer format is very powerful. But taking those questions and breaking them down into a series of sub-questions. So if you're writing a proposal paper or a decision paper, for example, and you want to, and the high level question is, what do we propose to do and why? You might then break down the body of that report into a series of smaller questions. For example, what's the proposal? What options did we consider? What are the risks and mitigations? And actually answering those questions like for like in the body of the report, and using those questions as headers. That's the first thing. The other thing to do, and it's something that we talk about quite a lot, and is quite popular with people who are perhaps more technical, particularly engineers, this resonates with, but is operate something called the pyramid principle. And it's actually, how can you break down information in a way that means nothing is missing and nothing is muddled? So you can have a concept, and you can actually show, okay, what are the positives and what are the negatives? And you break it out to be a pyramid in a way that is structuring a report to ensure nothing is missing and there's no gaps. And to my point earlier about actually sitting down and writing the report can be a really powerful exercise in and of itself for executives. This is where that can really come into its own, because it allows you to see where there are any gaps in arguments, and where something might be missing, and where board members actually might be asking questions because they've seen a breakdown of information. So that's a little bit about how you structure a report. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute, and I'm going to reshare an example for you that hopefully will be useful. Please do answer any kind of questions or refer to any questions whilst I do this in the Q&A function. But hopefully that has shared, and I can bring some of this to life a little bit. Now, brilliant. This is an example paper that brings together a few of the things that we've already spoken about. I will say this is a generic made-up company. It's a corporate example, but hopefully it still brings some of those things to life. Now, the first thing you can see is it's a people and talent update. And you can see a one-page executive summary, and it really should be a page because then it's a summary. And then you can see the main body of the report sitting behind, which is just a kind of few pages long. It's quite short compared to a lot of what we see, but hopefully covers a lot of ground. Now, the first thing to say is, as we've already spoken about, you've got the context here. 2 sentences. Why is this coming to the board and why now? You've then got the questions this paper is going to be addressing. So this is as simple and as high level as what is on my mind. And within that, you've got things like successes, challenges, opportunities, and risks. And I'll show you how that breaks down in just a moment. And then you've got the second question, which is a really critical one. What are the implications of this for our outlook and plan? So given everything I've shared to you, how should we course correct? What's the so what? And again, pulling out that insight. And actually, you can do this through your questions and through your headers, but you can also do this as you write, as you write particular statements, because you can kind of share a piece of information and constantly be thinking, what's the so what here? What's the implications of this for our reader? So those are the 2 questions that the report will cover. And as you can see up front on the first page, you've got like for like. What are the answers to those questions? So a few sentences on actually, given everything I've shared, these are the most critical things. This is what's keeping me up at night. And the second question here, what does this mean? Overall, my confidence that our talent pipeline can support growth is high, for example. So it's 1 sentence on where they are. We sometimes say to authors when they go to write this and they say, I can't possibly condense everything into a couple of sentences. First thing we say is, don't worry, you will have a chance to elaborate. But also, if you imagine that you are in pre-COVID times, in a lift with your chairman or your CEO, and they say, how's everything going in your function or your area? Or what about this project? This is your 60-second opportunity to really share what the key responses are. So that can be a helpful way of thinking about it. And then the next thing to say is the input sort that I was talking about earlier. And what are your questions to the board? You can see in this example, the questions are very specific. Okay, so do you have any ideas or advice on X, Y, and Z? It goes a step beyond kind of for decision or for approval, which really helps you as an author get value back from the board if this is appropriate for your organization. And the other thing you can see on here that I haven't mentioned is input received. And that's really a device to say, where has this board paper been within the organization? Who's approved it already? And what that really means is the board don't have to spend lots of time asking questions such as, has this gone to legal? Has this been approved by the executive committee, for example? And then you've got the body of the report itself. Now, what you'll be able to see is you've got that main question, what is on my mind, and it's been split into a series of sub-questions. So you've got, first of all, you've got 2 lenses. You've got the looking back and the looking forward lens as well on this page. Now, within looking back, you've got 2 lenses again. You've got the positive and you've got the negative. So what's gone well and what hasn't gone well. And here you've got simple bullet points, high level. These are the things that have gone well. These are the things I'm really proud of in my function or department. And then also you've got the what's not gone well. To my point earlier on, often board reports can be good news stories. Actually being able to share what's not gone well can be really helpful because you can pull it out up front. It's really clear. We've even used kind of red and green here, which not everybody loves, but I think is quite helpful for visual directors and people, because you can say, actually, this is not what's gone well. This is why, and these are how we're mitigating against it. This is how we're getting back on track. It gives you the opportunity to be on the front foot as the author, which can be helpful. And then you've got the looking forward lens. So this is split again into opportunities and risks. And actually, we see people are quite good at highlighting risks and concerns, right? But less so at the opportunities. And again, this is to the point, this is where trustees can really add extra value here, because they can talk about actually what in their experience they've seen on the horizon and what the new ways are that you can redirect and utilize those opportunities. And then finally, you've got that final question. What are the implications? Net, where does this leave us? Given everything I've covered today. Now, that's an example of a performance report, and obviously you'll all be involved in lots of different reports, and there'll be specific things for CFOs, and there'll be specific things for decision papers, and a whole host of the other reports and compliance documents that you need to cover. But hopefully that helps bring to life a few of the things that we've been talking about. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then reshare the slides quickly, because there's one final section that I'd like to cover, and that is actually writing style. So hopefully you can see the slides again now. But the final thing is, how can you write in a way that is clear, concise, and compelling? The first thing to say is we're not suggesting dumbing down any of the expertise that you have here. But what we are suggesting is breaking down complex concepts. And actually, when you look at journalistic techniques employed by people like the FT or The Economist, for example, the reading age, I think it's about 11. I mean, we sometimes hear suggestions that the reading age should be 8. But it's really actually looking at how can you use simplistic language to get across key concepts. And if anyone's in any doubt of this, that and I'm sure there can be a study to support everything, but there was a Harvard study that said actually, when people use simpler terms, they appear smarter. So if that's motivation, that could be helpful. But there's a few things that we suggest. First of all, write in the simplest terms possible. There's a bit of a myth that for board reports you have to write in a really legal tone of voice, or you have to write in a convoluted tone of voice. We suggest actually write in the simplest terms possible. Avoid jargon, and at least always explain it. Acronyms are a big one for this, particularly for trustees who are non-execs or aren't in the organisation every day. Please don't assume that they know what those acronyms are. Always explain it. You don't need to use a formal or legal tone of voice. I mean, we go as far as to say, actually, when you can inject sentiment and feeling into your report, that goes a long way in building trust between the board and the executive. And that's something that Sarah spoke about earlier. Actually, how can you develop that trust? When a report seems like it's written by an actual kind of person and there's accountability held there, it can be really go a long way to instilling trust. So one of the examples we sometimes use is, we missed our fundraising targets. Instead of we missed our fundraising targets, or fundraising targets were missed, even better to say we or I missed our fundraising targets, for example. It's that accountability element. And then the final point that I've kind of been referencing throughout, how do you draw out the so what? Every time you write something, thinking, what are the implications for this? How can I draw out that next stage as well? The other thing is, get conversation. We've spoken about the question and answer setup before, and actually the question and answer setup, the reason we're so passionate about it is because it really helps the writer focus their reports and focus around the exam question, but it also really helps the reader digest information as well. So those are a few stylistic points on actually how you can communicate in a really compelling way. What exactly is it that we've covered so far? I think it's just worth reiterating that. The 4 things that you can do. Ensure a focused brief. Set out right at the beginning of the report, what are the key questions that your report is going to be looking to answer, what's going to be included and what's not going to be included. And you can agree those before you even put pen to paper, between your co-sec, between your chair, between your CEO, between whoever is relevant for you as an organisation. Really recommend that, first of all. It does a long way to cut down the length of packs. Implementing an executive summary that covers a few basic things. Your context, the questions that the report will be centered around, the key messages of your report up front, the conclusions to those questions, and finally, most importantly, the ask of your report. What is it that you would like the board to give back to you? The third one, structuring information in a robust way. So really thinking about how can I break down these complex concepts using sub-questions, using subheadings to ensure that nothing is missing from the structure and the body of the report. And finally, writing in a clear, concise, compelling style, using simple language, cutting longer words, avoiding jargon, injecting some sentiment, maybe using the first person if you feel that's appropriate. holding that accountability and drawing out the so what and why is this so important. Brilliant. I'm going to pause there and give you a bit of a break from my voice. Hopefully that's given you a few ideas on actually what a great board paper can look like and some things that you can go and implement in your organisation. But I'm going to turn to Alison now, who I think has got some questions for us. And please do write them in. We're very keen to take them.
Thank you, Laura. That was really insightful, and really enjoyed your passion and enthusiasm for writing board papers. I think as someone who reviews and reads board papers lots, it's made me realise that I haven't necessarily dwelt on or stopped to think about how board papers are written and what a good approach is. So thank you for that. We do have some questions. I'm aware, Laura and Sarah, you both likely to have some points to say on these. So, Laura, I suppose sort of perhaps the first reflection for people who are in the room is who I think they might need to change is how can they persuade others that this is something that's worth changing or needs to change?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's something that we come across a lot, because for people who live and breathe this stuff, we almost sometimes think, isn't it obvious that this is something that needs to be changed? And there's a few different things. I think first of all, thinking about why this is critical for you and why now. Some of the advantages are unique usually for every organisation, but there are some themes that frankly I hear a lot. One is, potentially we've got a new, we know the regulator is going to be bearing a little bit more teeth this year. We can't afford to be spending unnecessary time mitigating against that risk and the regulation. So this is starting with the why, and one of the easiest ones is looking at the regulator and kind of saying, we need to make sure our house is in order. I think there's another thing though as well. If you've got a new change in strategy or potentially a new direction that you as an organisation are going in, sometimes that lends itself to saying, actually, we need to be working and operating faster and smarter. Board papers are a way that we can do that, because again, the writing of them themselves can be really valuable for the executive, but also it means we can get more value from our board and actually make sure that everybody is leaving that meeting thinking, you know what, that time drove our organisation forward. We were able to fulfil our goals in a much more valuable way because of that. The third one that I will say is that a huge amount of time and money and energy goes into drafting, redrafting, reading, collating, distributing board material. If you are on an efficiency drive in any way, this should be something that you look at, because I'm always shocked that there are inefficiencies that we accept with this whole process that we just wouldn't accept in any other function. So if you're on an efficiency drive and you need to get everybody on board and aligned that this is something worth changing, I would think about that as well. Think about that link. So those are the three things. Really think about the reason why this is important for your organisation, and also the things that will resonate most with the personalities that you have to persuade. This is a project that is most effective when it comes from the chair and CEO. So when you go to them and you say, I think we need to look at this, think about some of those three things. Actually, can we work faster and smarter because of the new strategy, initiative, change? Do we need to be more aware of the risks that the regulator holds? Or actually, is there an efficiency drive here? Is there something that we can be gaining from getting some time back? So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Laura. Sarah, did you have anything to add there?
Sorry, realised I was still on mute there. No, I think that's quite comprehensive on that one. Thanks, Alison.
Okay, thank you. Next question is about digital board packs. So some people have either used, heard of, come across them, where they're very interactive pack. How often do you see them, and what's your view on those, Laura?
So I think people often mean slightly different things when they say digital board packs. I think there's a few things that are helpful. I mean, we are fundamentally a tech business, so I'm very pro anything digital most of the time. And I know lots of people on the line will use a board portal, and perhaps others won't. I think in terms of driving effectiveness, efficiency, allowing directors to collaborate ahead of time in security, using a board portal is, for me, a no-brainer, but perhaps I would say that. I think there's quite a lot of interesting work being done at the moment on digital dashboards and actually how can you link data produced internally directly to the board pack, which I think could be an amazing tool, right, to see more relevant, up-to-date data. The one thing that I do always warn with data is actually taking a moment to pause and thinking, what is the purpose of this? Mm-hmm. And again, what is the question this data seeks to answer? Because I think I always make the joke that I don't know any organization that doesn't have enough data a lot of the time, but it's whether it has the right data and whether that data is answering the right questions. So beware of the data dump would be my warning there. That can sometimes be increased by having more kind of digital MI platforms linking directly to board papers.
Yeah, so it always comes back to the so what.
Yes, exactly.
Linked to that, been asked, it's been suggested by one attendee that they adapt a balanced scorecard approach to board reporting. And I wonder, have you seen that done, Laura, and have you seen it done well?
Yeah. So I'd say quite a similar thing there. I think a balanced scorecard can work great. I think it's similarly a kind of KPI dashboard can work well. It's something that we certainly recommend actually with CEO reports. But I think critically what we suggest is, and where actually we work with organisations on this is actually thinking about what is the most critical data. And deciding and agreeing as an organisation what needs to go in that balanced scorecard can be the trickiest point. And so at its highest level, we recommend, a great CEO's dashboard, for example, or balanced scorecard, whatever you want to call it, can be the apex of the information within the pack itself. And at its best, I think it needs to say, it needs to tell the story of actually, are we as an organisation fulfilling what we are here and set out to do? And quite often they can be too financially focused. So actually we suggest thinking about them across strategy, performance, both financial but also non-financial performance. So things like operations, customer, whatever is important to you, and governance as well. And when we talk about governance, really think about, are we working the right way? Are we mitigating risks in the right way? And actually, again, taking that high level approach of what as an organisation have we set out to do, and cascading down from there.
Yeah, so back to that core purpose.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alison, can I just add something on the previous question a minute? Because one of the things that we see quite a lot is papers being emailed out to Hotmail accounts, Gmail accounts, etc. And so I think the security point that you get from having digital board papers and using portals is a key factor, and we see that quite a lot within charities. I think as well it can increase accessibility, because you can change font size, etc. yourself, for example, on your device.
Yeah, really good point.
Thank you, Sarah. And linked to that, someone has asked about making board packs more accessible for people who are neurodiverse or don't find it easy to engage with lengthy written reports. Are there any other solutions other than that sort of digital one you referred to, Sarah?
Well, I think one of the things with this is that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So people have different needs and different requirements. So it's important to really find out exactly what is needed. But Microsoft now does have a lot of accessibility options within its tools, particularly working in Word, for example, but across all of its tools that you can help to improve things. For example, looking at size of tables, images, just font content. You can download more accessible fonts But I think it's a case of working out what's particularly needed and then working on that.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
And just to add to that, Alison, I think Sarah's spot on in really working out what is needed. I think it's going to be a really interesting area of development.
Yeah, I agree.
And one that is worth keeping an eye on for the future, because I mean, we're certainly looking at how you can integrate kind of multimedia approaches and video and audio and things into our platform. And I think there is some interesting work going actually on around the dynamics around the boardroom table and actually what the benefits of having a neurodiverse board are. So yeah, I think it's a great question. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
And someone has commented that boards are moving more towards wanting more graphics, dashboards, less narrative. So very much some change in there. Another question relates, Laura, to the use of appendices, and how do you balance the level of detail with the length of the board paper?
Yeah, it's a good one, and one that we get quite a lot, because I think there's one thing to say we shorten board papers, but then we throw all the extra detail in the appendices and the pack is enormous. So I think there's a couple of things. Again, it comes back to what is the question you're trying to address here? And actually, if it's a kind of sometimes appendices are used as a way to cover backs, essentially. And I think my challenge to that would be, don't assume that board members, if you were to not assume that board members read appendices, would you feel confident that you've raised the most critical things? So again, not burying those key risks, key items, key messages in the appendices is really critical. And actually, if they're important enough to go to the board, they're probably important enough to include in your main report. The other thing I will say with that is, I touched on at the beginning, the structure of the agenda, and actually working with whoever it is who owns that agenda and that forward calendar and forward view, to actually think about what information needs to go to in specific papers to allow board members to make the most viable decisions, gives you an opportunity to say, actually, this is quite important. So why don't we talk about it properly in September's board meetings, as opposed to trying to fill everything in the appendices for July, for example. So I think there's something about the structure and the planning, and actually making sure if things are critical that they've got a proper place in a board paper, but also not assuming that everything in appendices will be read. But of course, there will always be some directors who prefer a lot of detail on one specific thing. And I think appendices can be useful for that, but please don't bury key messages in appendices, would be my plea.
I think as well on that. We see quite a lot. It's around effective use of subcommittees and making sure that the committees are achieving their responsibilities. So sometimes you see things going to the board that could have gone to a committee or should have gone to a committee, or even repeated papers that went to committees being repeated in the board pack. And it's just what's the different requirements of each group, and making sure that we filter appropriately. I think the other thing that we've seen where organisations do use board portals is they have like a bit of a further reading part in the portal. So if you want to delve into something a bit more, if that's that's what you need to help you digest the board pack, you can direct people to some further reading if they want to do it. But as you say, Laura, the important stuff needs to be in the pack.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think, just one last one. This might be putting you on the spot a bit, Laura. You commented in the start about an average board pack is 288 pages, and the amount of time that would take to read. I'm sure there isn't a one size fits all answer, but is there an optimum size for a board pack, or is it about taking on board all of the things that you've said to get that brevity into those individual papers?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think sometimes we're slightly loath to be really prescriptive, because I think it depends on the organisation. But I would say that typically for something like a performance update, so like the paper that I shared, a one-page executive summary and then 2 to 5 pages of a body of report is probably more than sufficient. For a wider sort of proposal paper, you know, it might be longer. It might be kind of 5 to 8 pages, and plus a 1-page executive summary. And then of course you've got governance regulation type things that always need to appear in a board pack. So I'm sort of discounting those. But I would say adopt the spirit, and maybe less focused on the laws and boundaries. Or actually, if laws and boundaries are the only way you can get your authors to adopt the spirit, that might also be appropriate. But it depends on your organisation and how you like to implement change, I would suggest.
Thank you. Some areas we didn't touch on, as you said, were how to structure a board meeting agenda. So there's also a comment on you know, how to deliver a board paper in a board meeting. So I think potentially, you know, those are other areas that we may want to explore in future sessions. I think just seeing the time, perhaps hand back to Sarah just for some closing remarks.
Yes, thanks, Alison, and really a very big thank you to Laura for coming and presenting today and talking to you about this important topic. We know it's definitely of interest to our clients. It's something we get asked about a lot as well. But really, thank you everyone for joining. We will be sharing the recording. And if you have other questions, please don't hesitate to contact any of us. You've got our details here, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. But without further ado, I'll let you go. And again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.